You're very welcome to another episode of the Scaling Your Business podcast. For this episode, we're joined by Susan Dwyer, the founder of RiseUp. Susan, you're very welcome to the show.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks so much for having me. Delighted to be here.
Delighted to have you. Typical fashion of the show, three main areas: early influences, challenges, pivotal moments. No different with you. We're going to start with spending the first couple of minutes getting to know you. If I've done my research correct, you grew up in Dublin, potentially the Rathmines area, because I know you went to Alexandra College. Am I correct or incorrect with that?
Incorrect.
Incorrect.
And no, I grew up in Drogheda in County Louth.
Okay.
And I went to in Dublin, but I boarded there. So
Okay.
I've spent probably most of my life in Dublin, to be fair. But yeah, from Drogheda, and that's where I grew up.
What was life like growing up out there? Any kind of favorite stand-up memories?
Yeah, lots of good memories. Like, I'm the eldest of five, so busy household. We live pretty near a beach, so that was kind of a big part of our childhood. Played lots of sports right next door to the tennis club, so that was a big part of my childhood. So yeah, lots of good memories.
Okay. Before we move on from this segment of the podcast, one of the questions I ask is around impact and influence. Usually people can point to an acquaintance, a school teacher, a friend, a relative, someone who had a big impact on their early years that's helped them become the person they are today. Does any one or two or three people spring to mind for you?
Influences. Yeah, I probably was really lucky growing up. I had a lot of, kind of strong female role models in my life. I have a really good relationship with my mum. I was really lucky to almost have a second mum. She was called Auntie Bernie. She minded us basically. And she had a huge influence on me. And yeah, I had two grandmothers who were both entrepreneurs and successful business women. So I feel like I had a pretty fortunate start in life, having these people kind of around me. So yeah, lots of good influences from an early age.
Awesome. Very cool to hear that your grandmothers were entrepreneurs. You did a BA in college at UCD and then went on to complete a master's in management. What attracted you to stay on the extra year to do a master's in management, and why did you pick management?
That's a good question. Yes, I went to UCD, did a Bachelor of Arts degree. To be honest, I was never a big fan of college or academics. Didn't do particularly well, wasn't overly engaged. And then I suppose I did okay. Sorry, I didn't do terribly. But after the 3 years, I was 20. I don't know, what age are you when you graduate? 21, 22?
Yeah, 21, 22.
And I just still didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. Not a clue. I knew I was good with people, and I knew I always wanted to do something that involved dealing with people, but I didn't know how I would turn that into a career. And so, my family all come from business backgrounds, and, it was kind of their idea, well, maybe you should go and do a master's in business management. So, again, I was just trying to not prolong my decision-making process, but I suppose help me figure out the direction that I was going to go. And yeah, ultimately, it wasn't really until I finished college and my master's and I went traveling. I lived in London and I lived in New York for a couple of years. That's when I kind of really started to come into my own. So yeah, there wasn't any, I suppose, specific reason. Having said that, it was a good experience.
I've heard the UCD Smurfit College is a great place to go to. I've had a number of friends who've got masters in marketing from there, and they've all highly recommended it. You mentioned traveling. I do have some questions around traveling later on in the podcast, but I noticed that one of your earlier roles on LinkedIn was that you spent almost 2 years at Morgan McKinley. I'm reading from my screen here because the title I don't know, was a recruitment consultant. Kind of curious to know, was there any lessons you took from those, let's say 2 years? I think it was just shy of 2 years. Any skills you improved? Did you manage to build a nice network of people that you've tapped into in the future? Did you manage to improve communication skills? What did you take from your 2 years at Morgan McKinley?
Yeah, I guess I spent the last kind of 7 years in recruitment as a whole. And I think as a business, like it's all about people. Essentially, you're selling people to other people
Mm,
in the legal sense. And I guess you learn about building relationships. And for me, like that's what business is all about, is
mm,
building trust with people and building strong relationships. um and working closely with candidates, particularly in the recruitment world, you kind of get an insight into like their motivations, and why are they unhappy here, and why are they moving here, and why are they negotiating pay on X. And for me, that was really interesting. I kind of learned how people work in that kind of corporate environment and that setting. And I learned that people at the end of the day do business with people that they like. And so,
mhm,
we can all spot a salesperson from a mile away, but if you actually just focus on building trust with your candidates and your clients, and actually being vulnerable with them, and being honest with them, like that's how I built my network and my
mhm.
relationships. And it stood to me. And so that was kind of my biggest learning from recruitment, that people have emotions and feelings. And I think if you tap into that, and if you're genuine with people, they'll want to work with you, and it just makes everything a lot easier.
That's a pretty cool insight to get, like some of the common trends that will pop up around why people are unhappy in roles and things like that. Um, you're the founder of RiseUp, the reason you're on this podcast. So rather than me make an attempt at telling people what it is, why don't you take the mic and spend 30 to 60 seconds telling people what it is and why you started it?
Sure. Yeah, so RiseUp is my newest venture. I set it up this time last year. And basically, it's an online career development platform for women. So our mission is to advance more women in their careers, and also to work with companies to help them to narrow that gender leadership gap. So we do a mix of things. We do programs around coaching and mentoring, and networking as well, to help empower women in their careers, and promote more women into leadership positions. So something that I'm personally very passionate about. When I reflect on my time in recruitment, I spent the last couple of years in executive search, so headhunting for all these kind of key leadership positions. And the most obvious problem to me was that there was such a massive gap at that top level. All my clients would be coming to me saying, "Hey, Susan, want to hire a CFO this month or a COO this month? Heads up, 80% of our leadership team is male. We need and want to hire a woman this month." And so this is just something that kept on happening again and again and again. That I thought, well, there needs to be more solutions focused around addressing this gap. And I think, most companies have very good intentions, but there's definitely a big disconnect between the intentions and the action. So I'm trying to help with the action.
Well, before we jump into this, there's 2 testimonials from your site that I pulled to kind of give people an idea of how you work. First testimonial is, I can't remember the name, but it is, "The workshop was an extremely practical and beneficial experience in breaking down the steps for defining my future career and role. It felt like a safe place where we could all share our experience and listen to one another." A second one is, "I really enjoyed the Rise Up maternity workshop. Almost 50 women in a Zoom room was uplifting. The content of the workshop addressed the biggest inner fears I think most women have about returning to work, and allowed space to reflect on why we have those fears and offer tips on what might do to address them." So with those 2 testimonials, and there's plenty more on your website, I'll leave links below to all your content and your website and your LinkedIn account as well, if anyone wants to connect with you. I've got a question. You wrote a blog on your website around what mentorship means to you. And one quote that you highlighted in bold on it that I liked and stood out to me as well was, having to figure out things alone cost me time. So where do you see the value in having a mentor?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like mentorship for me is invaluable. It's, a no-brainer when it comes to growing and developing your career. Um, I think like it's a massive part of what we do at RiseUp, because often, a lot of us work in more male dominated industries, and we might not have those kind of female role models in our company or in our industry. So I wanted to create a space, a safe space where people can connect with others and learn from those. I think, a mistake I made, and why I set up RiseUp in the first place, was that I felt stuck in my career, as we all experience at some point or another. And I was in a complete fog, and I didn't know like what direction I was going in. And, to my own detriment, instead of kind of reaching out to people who have gone through similar things, I kind of went through this period of trying to figure things out by myself. And it took me a while. And had I had a mentor to help me get through that, we may have came to the same solution, but I would have gotten there a lot quicker. And that's the benefit I see with mentorship. It's having that kind of impartial individual in your life, or individuals. I think we should all multiple mentors, that we can go to, who doesn't care about your personal life, who doesn't care about, you and your work, but is just there for you and to help guide you. And for me, like, that is invaluable. And I think, the reality is, whatever problem that I'm facing today for the very first time, you can be guaranteed that there are millions of other people out there who have A, gone through the exact same challenge, but B, have overcome it and, turned it into something good. And so, it makes complete sense to seek these people out. But often I think, when I was looking for a mentor, for example, I went about it the completely wrong way. And, I think people are a bit awkward about how to approach mentors.
Mm-hmm.
Sending like a really successful woman who I'm sure is very business a DM on LinkedIn, been like, hey, do you want to be my mentor? There's a certain way to go about these things, and it's not that formal approach. It's more informal than that. So basically, like with RiseUp, I wanted to take that stress and anxiety away from women, because a lot of us, sorry, not just women and men, a lot as humans, I don't think we like to ask for help. I think it can be difficult
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of us. And so, yeah, I just wanted to create a community whereby mentorship was like this really natural thing. And that, instead of having one mentor, well, why not have, a community of mentors?
I like it. Gender diversity is something I want to talk about. And there's this story that Rory Sutherland tells it much better than I do. But essentially, it's about back how England were the leaders in the technology space, and how they could have been the leaders today in the technology space, but they've fallen behind. And it's a story of World War II, when they needed more people to help them out on computers. And actually, women were better at the job than men. And they brought a ton of women in, and they became the leaders in that space. And then as soon as the war was over, they fired all the women, and they've never got back to that level of like being the leaders in the technology space, or at the forefront of it. Just an example of why gender diversity is important. And he tells the story much better than I do. And I'll leave a link to that segment. I think it's a 4 or 5 minute clip where he talks about it, if anyone's interested in the actual story. But what I strive for is an equal voice for all, in terms of hiring the person that's best suited to the role, rather than just giving it to someone based on their gender. So I'm interested, from your perspective, what steps can be taken to improve gender diversity. I asked this because there's a guy I'm friends with. He's a VP of sales in the UK again, and he says that men are more likely to take a risk at going for a job if they see some of the requirements that they don't meet, whereas women are more likely to not put themselves forward for a job if there's requirements that they don't meet. So from your angle, what do you think can be taken to improve gender diversity, to get more of a equal mix?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's a big question. There's a number of things that can be done, and some of them are more simple than others. But I think, as a starting point, we all know that there's a massive gender pay gap. And so the more companies that are being transparent about what they're paying their employees and encouraging employees to also share, what they're being paid is the first step. Because, that is a big part of it. So transparency of pay is one thing. I think another thing is talent attraction, right? So when companies are hiring for new talent, I've seen a lot of companies do very informal interview processes. So, meet with Joe Blogs for a chat, and then meet with so-and-so for another chat. And it actually doesn't work, like when it comes to hiring the best candidate. So like I'm encouraging companies to start like proper formal interview structures and plans, whereby there's a certain set of questions that you ask the candidate, and then the next interviewer comes in, they ask the exact same questions, and then they compare notes. And that is how you're gonna, and not just get the best gender, like it's not, but that's how you're gonna get the best qualified candidate. Because often, say for example, we hit it off, you went to the same school as me, and unconsciously I'm like, yeah, I like this person, they're like me, I want to hire this person. And so, companies really need to start looking at their interview process.
Agreed.
It is a big thing. And then, another massive thing is embracing a company culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion, tapping into more diverse networks to attract more diverse talent. And gender is one piece of a much bigger pie when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But if you're constantly looking at the same talent pools or going to the same people to attract new hires, you're gonna keep hiring the same people. So companies really have to get creative about how they're attracting more diverse talent. And unless they do that, there's no change. There's no change that's going to happen. And so I personally think that, okay, you attract diverse talent, then that's the first thing. But the inclusivity piece is almost, the bigger challenge. So, okay, I've attracted this person. How do I make them feel like they belong here? How do I make them feel included? How do I make them, feel safe and happy, and that they can be vulnerable and open up? That's the big piece that a lot of companies need to figure out. And the first step is awareness, like, and especially at leadership level, having that self-awareness and acknowledging your unconscious bias, and act accordingly around that. So yeah, I think awareness.
It sounds though that could be work done not just on the hiring point, on the onboarding point as well.
Yeah, 100%. It's a complete 360 lifestyle. It's the employee experience from hiring to retaining. So yeah.
Well, there's a blog you wrote on 10 ways to attract and retain talent in 2021, and I'll leave a link to that below. You went traveling in 2020 to some amazing places in South America. Colombia is high on my list of places to visit. There's a quote you mentioned that I really like, and it's, we travel because we need to, because distance and difference are the secret tonic to creativity. When we get home, home is still the same, but something in our minds has changed, and that changes everything. So my question is, how do you think travel changed your perspective on life?
I
know that's a big question to just drop on you.
That's a big question, and I took that quote from someone else. I can't claim that one. But I don't know. I think, for me, I'd never really taken a break from work. I'd always just kept working. I went from one job to the next, and I didn't take a break in between. And like, as someone who worked in recruitment, that totally went against my own advice. I would always tell people, before you change jobs or careers or whatever, make sure you take some time off in between, because if you don't, like, you're never going to get the clarity and you know, in terms of what you actually want out of your career, out of life. And for me, like, I had been on a treadmill for 7 years pretty much, never really taking time to think about, you know, what's actually important to me, what am I passionate about, you know, what am I interested in, what kind of impact do I want to have. And so, like, I went traveling by myself, which, you know, is
Really
not
cool.
is not something that everyone does, but I really wanted to give myself a chance to, I don't know, just reflect and experience things by myself. So on that particular trip, like, I did a lot of that. I suppose when you spend, of course I met people along the way, but when you spend kind of a lot of time by yourself, you're kind of forced you're forced to face your thoughts. And you know, that's exactly what I did. I took a lot of time out to reflect on the things that I wanted to do in life. I also spent a lot of time getting to know people from all over the world, people who I'd never meet in my small little bubble in Dublin. And so
Mm.
it gave me like huge perspective, like it does to most people when they go traveling. You know, that there's just so much to learn, and there's so much to do, and there's so many interesting people out there. And for me, like, when I came back, I was just really determined to do something I was passionate about, and also to have a positive impact on whatever it is that I was going to do. Um,
Hmm.
and so for me, traveling kind of gave me that inspiration and that clarity piece.
Well, now you're the founder of RiseUp. What's your favorite aspect of being your own boss or being a CEO?
That's a good question. I don't know if I was ever a very good employee, to be honest. Like, I used to kind of, I remember doing this test in Morgan McKinley, my first employer, and like I failed the compliance piece.
Mhm.
But I don't know if it's an element of not, you know, I don't really like to be told all the time what to do. So I guess for me, like, flexibility is really important. I like to create my own schedule. Um, and I like the autonomy of being able to do what I want to do and when.
Hmm.
So yeah, for me, it's kind of the creative freedom and the autonomy piece that's important.
I've got three final questions for you. One of them is I'm always interested in how people continue to grow their business, and you've got a growing community of members. Um, I'd imagine that a huge percentage of where new members come from is from referrals and word of mouth. Are there any other ways that you continue to grow? I know you were recently had an article on RTE, but are there any other ways that you continue to get the word out about your community to grow it?
Um, yeah, like for me, and being part of a community, it's all about providing value that's resonating with your audience. Um, and once, like, so it's constantly about providing value and content. And you know, I would set up meetings with a lot of the members to kind of chat about what they're enjoying, what could be done better, and what they would like to see in the future around certain programs and initiatives. So it's really kind of building that trust with existing members and listening to their feedback. And look, a lot of the stuff I've done this year have been pilot programs, and you know, it's been a trial and error journey, but you know, there's been huge learnings out of that. So yeah, like you said, like, the biggest, I encourage all our members to, like, I want them to want their friends to be in this
Mm.
community. And so, like, for me, they're my marketeers. Like, you know, they're the people that advocate for the mentorship and the coaching and what they got out of that maternity workshop, and they tell their friends about that. So like, you know, I can invest whatever in social media marketing and this, that, and the other. But for me, like, that's been the most powerful way to grow the community so far.
If you had the final decision to add a mandatory subject to the secondary school curriculum, one that's not on it currently, and you were in charge, what would that subject be and why?
Oh wow. What would that subject be and why? I think like, school for me, as I said, like, I loved the social side and I loved making friends. I wasn't necessarily in love with any of my subjects. Um, but I think, there's no emphasis on getting to know yourself at that young age. Like the self-awareness piece, the tapping into like, what do I enjoy doing? Like I think so many of us after school go into the wrong career because we think it's what our parents want or it's society's expectations. And the reality is most people don't enjoy their job. Well, a huge proportion of people really dislike the job. And I think, something should be done about that in school, like having those sessions about like self-awareness and, tapping into who you are as a person, your motivations, what makes you tick. And then maybe when you finish sixth year or whatever, you might have a bit more clarity around, okay, well, maybe this is what I want to do in college, or maybe I don't want to go to college at all. Maybe I want to do this. So yeah, I think more kind of inner work is something that could really benefit young people and lead them into careers that they actually enjoy and not one that they can't wait to get out of.
Great answer. Great answer. Final question is, I'd like you to imagine it's the year 2030 and you're looking back on the last decade. You can answer this personally, professionally, or a combination of both, but imagining it is 2030 and you're looking back, what would you like to be looking back on?
Imagine it's 2030 and I'm looking back, and what would I like to be looking back on?
Mm-hmm.
As in like my career or the
Yeah,
work?
if you're sitting there and it's now the year 2030 and you're looking back going, I'd like to have accomplished, again, personally or professionally, X, Y, and Z in my business, or X, Y, and Z personally. You can choose both, or you can just choose professionally if you want it. And yeah, what you would like to be able to sit there and go, I've accomplished this, I've grown the community to this size, I've brought on all these people, I don't know, I started this, I stopped doing that, I scaled it internationally.
Yeah. For me, I would like to look back and first of all, seeing that I've grown like a really powerful global community of women and
Mm-hmm.
underrepresented talent. Like I'm all about results. So like, I'd love to see kind of outcomes and like the impact that the community has had on people's careers. Yeah, like for me right now, it's all about growth and looking at opportunities as to how we can scale the community, but still like keep the value and the authenticity piece, which sometimes isn't an easy thing to do. But yeah, for me, just constantly right now, it's about providing value and looking to scale the community and looking at opportunities to do that.
Awesome. Well, Susan, I'll leave links to your LinkedIn, your business website, your blog, everything we've mentioned in the podcast below, and that Rory Sutherland story as well. But for today, thanks for being my guest, and I wish you continued success.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.